I'm going to go straight to Dr. Andrew Meyerson now, who is a junior doctor in A&E in East London. Dr. Meyerson, thank you for joining me this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate this is going to be a question you're going to be answering a lot over the next 4 days. But if you could give us in brief, why is it that junior doctors are striking again?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. And I'm sorry to hear about your partner having to push back, having their appointment rescheduled. It's awful. Look, this is, among many other things, this is a pay dispute. Our junior doctor pay and our consultant pay has dropped by over 30% in the last 15 years. But it is about so much more than that. 10 years ago, the NHS was ranked the #1 healthcare service in the world. There was no other country on earth that was delivering a better quality care for such a bargain price. We were not wasting the taxpayer money. We were delivering high-class, world-class care on par with what you would expect here in the sixth wealthiest country in the world. And over the last 10 years, the government has just completely run down the system. They've pulled £400 billion out of the NHS over the last decade. Mm-hmm. And so no plan for beds, for staff, and for social care. And we've seen what the consequences of that are. 10 years ago, a patient could see their GP in 24 to 48 hours. Now it's taking 2 weeks. 10 years ago, they could be seen in A&E in under 4 hours, and now it's over 12. Our cancer waiting times now used to be 2 weeks, and now they are sometimes a month for patients to start treatment. This is unacceptable. Just looking at how difficult it has become to work in the NHS, we're having a crisis for NHS staff and NHS patients who deserve so much better than what this government, who's been in power for the last 13 years and running the system into the ground, it's awful. And so
I'd like to come back.
Alarms we raise, this is the only way that they have shown any response to any of the safe staffing concerns that we have.
Let's respond to some of the points that you have made there, Dr. Andrew Meyerson, because Health and Social Care Secretary Steve Barclay has said patients are bearing the brunt of the impact of continuous strikes across the NHS, and further action by the BMA will cause more appointments and more procedures to be postponed. The question here really is, how ethical is it for doctors to be going on strike?
I think it's entirely ethical for us to be doing this. I think we have a moral obligation at this point to go on strike. Before any industrial action happened, we were up at about 7 million. No matter what we do over the last decade, no matter how many alarms we raise, every single winter, the winter crisis gets worse and worse and worse and worse. This government doesn't listen. They have not listened to experts for the last decade. They pushed through the 2012 Healthcare Act. They pushed through the 2022 Healthcare Act. They refused to adequately fund and resource the NHS for a decade. And that is why we are here right now. And we feel awful for patients going through this right now, but this government refuses to listen. And so that's why we're fighting for ourselves, fighting for our patients, and fighting for the NHS in the way that we are.
Now, part of this has been around how much junior doctors are being paid, as much as I appreciate your focus has been on the way in which the NHS is being run and the funding. Now, Health and Social Care Secretary Steve Barclay has said, as recommended by the independent pay review body, we are giving first-year doctors in training a 10.3% uplift and an average annual pay rise of 8.8%. That is worth between £3,000 and £4,700, depending on the stage of training. Most tuning into Radio London would say, surely this is a step in the right direction, especially for those perhaps working in private sector who are unable to get these type of pay rises. What would you say to them?
If you look at the current situation, that NHS doctors and NHS staff are leaving in record numbers. Our pay has dropped so considerably in the last 15 years. We're not asking for a pay rise here. We're asking for a pay restoration to what we were making back in 2008. If you look at what a junior doctor makes here in the UK versus what they make in Australia and New Zealand, it is double what they're making here. And so it's not a surprise that we are seeing our colleagues flee in record numbers to Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, and elsewhere. And
I'm glad you've mentioned that.
Trying to encourage us to go and work.
Sure, I'm glad you've mentioned that, because I did want to talk to you about the fact that we are aware of the numbers, as you just mentioned there, that junior doctors are leaving the profession or perhaps moving into private health. There's been an increase in privatised healthcare. How much of a toll has that taken on doctors in public healthcare as well?
Well, I mean, the government talks about using more of the private sector to help reduce waiting lists. The workforce for the private private sector are mostly NHS doctors and staff who will do extra shifts to earn a little bit extra money working privately, or they work there privately exclusively, and then the NHS loses an extraordinary asset that we've invested in and we've trained. It's terrible when we lose a doctor to the private sector to abroad. The one word that this government seems to be allergic to is retention. Doctors are fleeing in record numbers because it has become far too difficult to work here. We have staff mental health and staff suicide at record numbers right now.
Goodness, our listeners will be shocked to hear that.
It's absolutely awful. I went to another memorial service for a colleague who that happened to in the last couple of months. They need to start listening to NHS frontline staff, because we are screaming as loud as we can.
Just finally, from a lot of what you're saying here, many have felt, and we do speak to many listeners who call into Radio London who say the government, of course, initially put the NHS in place because they saw the value in public health care in society, in British society. Do you now feel the government still values public health care in the same way, or has it been taken for granted?
I think a lot of people take the NHS for granted, but I think this government in particular has done extraordinary damage to the public health in the last decade, to the point where I can say confidently that I do not feel that the British public are safe with this government running their NHS. I really don't. We're seeing 500 deaths, preventable deaths, every single week in this country from delays accessing NHS emergency care. They have told us that they have a plan for 40 hospitals. That's not true. They've told us that they're going to fix social care. That's not true. They told us they value NHS staff after the pandemic. That's just not true. They don't care about your health system. They don't care about your family's health, and they're trying to push more people into private health care. And so, I do not trust this government to look after the health and welfare of the British people.
A personal question, if I may. Why are you still a doctor within the NHS then?
I love the NHS. I dearly love the NHS because, if you could tell from my accent, I'm not from here. Yes. I'm from the United States, a place where you have to use your credit card to pay for healthcare. Whereas a clinician, I have to ask people, how they're going to pay for it before I treat them. Where we have 30 million people who have no health insurance at all, 50 million people who are underinsured, where you have 500,000 medical bankruptcies every single year. In the wealthiest country on the planet, that's barbaric. That's unacceptable. And so, as I see the healthcare system here, I see this government trying to turn this healthcare system, this beautiful thing that you guys have that was ranked number 1 10 years ago, to try to turn it into the American system. It breaks my heart, which is why I love the NHS so much and why I'm NHS for life. I want to make the system better. I really do.
Well, thank you for joining us here on BBC Radio London and for clearly stating exactly how you feel and your love for the NHS. It really does come across. Thank you for speaking to me today. Dr. Andrew Meyerson, Junior Doctor in the A&E in East London.